Today's topic is titled The Talon Mine, What is the Real Story? With Chris Baldwin, retired mining engineer. His last position was Technical Services Superintendent, helping with permitting and starting up the historic sulfide Haile Gold Mine in South Carolina. Chris has spent half of his career on the Iron Range in a variety of positions, including mine management, mine planning, engineering, tailings dam construction, and underground mine planning and operations. Minnesota must be realistic about what the whole Talon nickel mine project is likely to entail. Can we really contain and clean up long-term sulfide mining pollution? Chris, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I put up this slide here. We'll kind of jump around a little bit, but this is Silver Bay at dumping their tailings into Lake Superior. It seemed like a good idea at the time, I'm sure. It was cheap. There's the mill right next to it, and boom, right into the lake. So the idea here is to save money. That's clear. Everything I say today is my opinion, and I'm representing myself. I grew up in South Minneapolis and spent summers at Deer Lake, just north of Cohasset. Deer Lake is one of the top clearest lakes in Minnesota. I think it's either number one or two in that range anyway. So I'm familiar with lake water quality. My mother's father came to the Iron Range with a new telegraph key in 1902 and got a railroad job and eventually wound up as the depot master in Coleraine, where my mother grew up. My dad grew up on a farm in Michigan, and he ended up becoming the vice president or research director for Cargill. When I was 12 years old, he took me on an exploration drill camp in Canada. And we were looking around in the woods just kind of on a lark and discovered an outcrop of quartz, and voila, there's gold. And I got gold fever. It's poisonous. Be careful. I went to the Colorado School of Mines. I spent some time at the University of Minnesota. I also worked at the Mineral Resources Research Lab at the University of Minnesota. I did master's management course study work at St. Scholastica. I worked in underground mines. I worked in an underground salt mine in New York, uranium mines in New Mexico and Colorado. During the crash in the 1980s, when everything hit the skids, including iron mining, I helped build a large cabinet factory in Aurora, Aurora, Colorado, as a plant mechanical engineer. I spent 20 years working at Keewatin Taconite and 5 years at Minorca. I wanted to finish my career. Bucket list was to work in a gold mine. So I up and left and went to South Carolina in 2011 and helped them get their permits to start up the historic Haile Gold Mine, like Alan was talking about. I'll explain a little bit more of that. The Duluth section of the Society of Mining Engineers awarded me the Engineer of the Year in 1997. I also was vice president of the International Society of Explosive Engineers Lake Superior chapter. And we did lots of training and teaching of blasting techniques. And you can see a little bit here where I like to think that I was a driller. Anyway, I'm standing next to a D11 down there. That's me in the lower left. Why am I speaking out? You look at this crazy looking lady down in the left corner, Betty Willard. She was one of my pivotal inspirations to become an environmental steward in my mining career. She was one of the leading experts on alpine ecology, and her main focus was to integrate large projects, including pipelines and mines, with ecology. And she was a world famous expert. And her main big call to fame was the Alaska pipeline and integrating the ecology of the region, well, all across Alaska. And so she understood that the problem with these big projects was that the engineers didn't understand about environmental science. And so you can kind of see her going, don't you guys get it? And so there's a picture of her trying to explain to engineers why ecology is important and why it should be integrated. And she was the first one at the Colorado School of Mines to bring environmental science department. She was instrumental in helping me understand how mining fits or doesn't fit in the rest of the ecosystem. I put a picture in there with the Breaker Boys in Pennsylvania. They're about 12 years old, and that's when I really decided I wanted to be a mining engineer, and I thought that mining was glamorous, so I had to put that in there. But the real reason for that is that when I was at Haile Gold Mine, we were in the process of working through with the Corps of Engineers and attorneys and other third-party engineering groups. One afternoon, we were on the phone in a group call, and the project manager hung up the phone and said, "Listen, we have to decide now, how are we going to comport ourselves?" And it was kind of an odd question. It's like, what are you talking about? How do we, what are you saying? And he said, how are we going to run this project? Is it going to be the low road of environmental catastrophe, or are we going to try to do something different here? And everybody was on this was their capstone project for their career. It was we were all getting ready to retire. This was it. And so the decision was that we would try to make Haile Gold Mine the premier of sulfide containment in the world. And so we were going to do whatever it took to become an extraordinarily high level, and our ethics were going to be pristine and set a world-class example of how mining could be done. And this, I'll explain more, but anyway, the idea was that we had to change our mind on how we were going to comport ourselves. And we all told stories about what we saw in mining in our career, and we didn't want to replicate that. We weren't going to be involved in doing something that was going to damage the environment. Excuse me, I got a cold. The other picture here, you can see it in the lower right-hand corner, is the twisted steel of the 35W bridge. And the reason I put that in there, and you can see a big crowd of people looking on the bridge right behind it. They're all looking down at this disaster. I believe that engineers, pilots flying airplanes, doctors that are working on patients, we all are serving the public in some capacity of safety. And the responsibility of engineering is to make sure that bridges don't collapse and that ecosystems don't collapse. And that's why I'm speaking out, that I believe that some of the lakes and rivers that are being impacted by the sulfides from taconite mining are indeed causing a collapse of the aquatic ecosystem. And so I'm titling this slide as being a responsible mining engineer. And one of the things that we always talked about in our safety meetings as a mine manager is that what you walk by, you live by. If you see something, you say something. You don't just ignore it. And if you ignore something, it just becomes part of the background. And then that's your ethics that you live by. I think that's most of what I wanted to say here. The nose of the camel that we were talking about, that Alan was speaking to, refers to a smaller project that is a limited scope that's submitted for permitting, which after permits are granted becomes an incremental growth project that can evade higher levels of scrutiny through expensive environmental impact statements. This can just happen when there is more ore discovered and reserves are increased. No taconite mine project has ever had an EIS for expansion. I believe the copper nickel miners are hoping for the same treatment. They've made some comments and we can see why I can explain more, but their lack of candor and details about some of their projects reveal what they expect for the permitters, the MPCA. Talon has submitted a permit to mine a small fraction of high-grade zone from the entire 12-mile-long district, like Alan was saying, and haul it out of state for milling. And then what? Okay. The first copper nickel sulfide mine permit issued will become the blueprint for how Minnesota will regulate sulfide pollution and protect water quality. The polymet permit issued has revealed the intentions of the MPCA to favor protecting lower mining costs for international miners over protecting the public. On the left here, you can see a picture of this red stream in Spain. It's actually called Rio Tinto, which is kind of an odd name company that wants to garner public support. That's a head scratcher. I can't explain that. But as you see, as the camel sticks its nose in the tent, the rest of it's going to follow. Here's the Tamarack, a map of the Tamarack region. Like Alan said, you can see where the Mississippi and the St. Croix watershed is. It's a very water-rich environment. That would be an understatement. It's practically flooded most of the time. One thing I wanted to say about what I believe is, I'm just going to call it resource piracy, but it's high grading. So when you high grade a mineral reserve, you're reducing the value of the long-term amount of ore that's left. If you were trying to husband the entire deposit, you would be careful to mine it in a more uniform manner, where you wouldn't just take the high grade and then try to figure out how to deal with all the low grade. I believe that the Flambeau mine in Ladysmith, Wisconsin, was a case of that. It was convenient just to go and snatch out the high grade zone. And I don't think that, well, it's different because there's a big river in the middle of it, but I don't think that anything else is going to be fine there. Here's a picture of their project. They didn't specific detail any description of putting a liner under any of this this facility. And you can see the portal. There should be some kind of liner effect to protect the groundwater under this entire pad. And the only liner that they are specifying is the liner for the decline that they're going to use a rotary boring machine. Some of the other aspects of the lack of details in this proposal is that it reveals some of their expectation, I believe, that they aren't going to be required to give specific details, that they just say, in general, this is what we're going to do, give us a permit to do it, and we'll hash out all the rest later. I think that reveals some of the aspect of the relationship between the MPCA and the mining company. We had to go through enormous levels of detail at Haile Gold Mine, and they just haven't done it here at all. Again, here's the beginning of the taconite industry. This is how they dealt with their tailings, to put it in the lake. I wrote a op-ed a year ago about the nose of the camel and Talon mining. And since then, in the last year, the MPCA has been remanded for hiding reports and putting their thumb on the scale for the polymet permit. New Range, which is polymet, has gone back to the drawing boards to present new mine plans for permitting. And Talon has received taxpayer money to continue drilling, even though they have discovered what they claim as being the most pure nickel on the planet, so they say. Manganese drilling near Emily has identified the highest grade manganese in North America. The global mining index has gone up, and the global mining index is, I think, the top 10 mining companies, which Rio Tinto is like number 2. And what that means is there's increased expectation to discover and find a shrinking amount of ore reserves that are large enough for mining scale. Greenbridge is an offshoot of part of the project, but you can see they have titanium dioxide, and it's I was mistaken yesterday, but it is actually an oxide ore, an iron oxide ore, and they've discovered 45 million ton resource. Well, let me explain something about resources, reserves, and it. The resource can be a drill intercept where there's just one hole or a fraction of number of holes of what would be required to carry out a mine operation. And reserves are what are described as being mineable as creating enough economy for profits. So what you can see here is that they've discovered some titanium. And if you look down here, you can see where Tamarack is in relationship to, this is the Duluth complex. The South Contact Zone is what they're calling it. Over on the left here, you can see all these other copper nickel deposits from Spruce Road, Maturi, Birch Lake, Mesaba, North Met. You can see this line of copper nickel here. There's a contact zone. There's a lot of mineralization going on. But Greenbridge is another junior trying to put together enough drill data and sell it for a project. Again, here's a picture of what peak oil, and here's a graph of the timeline and the billions of barrels a year. Well, peak oil just changed when they figured out how to do fracking. So the reason I put this in here is that it's very likely that the battery market will also make the same transition. And so there's an expectation to use sodium ion in batteries rather than just nickel, lithium nickel. In 1976 to 1979, there was a regional copper nickel study done. And at the time, they put a moratorium on putting out any permits for copper nickel mining. The reason that they claim in the beginning of the study is that the study was commissioned because it was believed that conventional site-specific environmental impact statements and the corresponding regulatory process were inadequate to deal with the broader issues involving the unexploited resource. And I would say that that would be a smelter. Where are you going to put the smelter? There's a proposal to include in a new study the Tamarack region, which hadn't been discovered in 1976. So it's really an important thing to find out what we're going to do in the whole state. We have 50 years of additional sulfide pollution from taconite mines. The regional study is imperative that now must include the Tamarack district. It's a very sensitive wild rice growing region and very high risk for sulfide pollution to affect it negatively. And where will the first copper nickel mill be built? Talon is claiming that they're going to haul the ore off to North Dakota. Okay. Maybe that's true. I don't know. It's important, I think, to look at what the copper nickel mining would reflect the same historical past as iron mining, and the facts that people generally don't know about taconite mining is that there is sulfides in the taconite ore. There's also been ongoing pollution from mines such as the Dunker River mine that LTV opened up in the 1960s. And here's the pit that's been mined out, the taconite pit, and then right next to it is the Duluth gabbro that was stripped off the top. And these dumps have leached into Bob's Bay of Birch Lake. Birch Lake is up here. That's been going into the boundary waters since 1960s. That's a Lake Superior. You see the Beaver, Silver Bay, right at the beginning of that picture of the tailings going right into the lake. The St. Louis River is affected by LTV. Lake Vermilion is right downstream from Mintac and Menorca. Swan Lake is right downstream from Keetac. And all these lakes and all these waters have been affected. Our ongoing pollution from sulfides from taconite mining. A Minnesota DNR report in 2003 found that taconite mining is the second largest source of mercury emissions after coal-fired power plants. Mintac EPA has listed Vermilion and Pike Rivers as impaired waters from sulfate. I can go on and on, but I think you get the point. The point of this slide is that you can see that in development, production, and closure, that the taconite mines are relatively old, in the timeline, and copper nickel mining is over here. No taconite mine has gone through a closure, and so part of the method of convincing the public that mining is not a hazard to the environment is that we want to change the word closure to economic transformation. And this would be a perfect way to describe something like the Redhead Bike Trail, where people and things go over the edge all the time. In a normal mining situation, MSHA has a great deal to say about how you safely manage high walls and the threat of falling over the edge of something with fences and whatnot. Now we're letting kids drive bikes right over it. That's kind of a head scratcher too. I want to get to we're going to run out of time here. Anyway, so my career bucket list as a mining engineer, I wanted to work in a gold mine before I retired. So I took a job at in Haile Gold Mine with Remarco, and what their plan was to drill and discover more gold and develop a new mine. Most people don't understand that there's an area called the Virginia Slate that goes from Virginia down through North and South Carolina into Georgia. And this was the site of the first gold rush in America. It also, the stampede of prospectors and miners clashed with the natives that were here. And it actually began the push of people off their land and began what is now understood as the Trail of Tears. This wasn't good. Charlotte, you can see it right here. The reason the town was there, it had saloons and whatnot. They also had a couple of mints there to handle the volume of gold mining traffic. But this rift here is actually part of the Mid-Atlantic rift that's about 500 million years old. And it's the same thing where Iceland is splitting apart. And that this is the effect of 500 million years of plate tectonics. Originally, the gold was panned in the streams, and then it was liberated by roasting. The gold is encapsulated in the sulfide mineral of iron pyrite. So the iron pyrite obviously is the same sulfides that are involved in at Tamarack mine, and the copper nickel has the same effect of weathering and causing acid mine drainage that we also had in South Carolina. Also, this was an important source of sulfur during the Civil War. The South didn't have access to sulfur deposits. So they mined the iron pyrite and did some chemistry and got sulfur to make gunpowder. When Sherman did his march through the sea during the Civil War, he came by there and burned it down. So that was an interesting piece of history. But the ore that we were mining was not in big stringers like veins and whatnot. It was more like in clouds of, I would just say a cloud that had a higher grade in the middle and decreasing on the edges. It was really difficult to sort out as we were drilling and blasting going down through the pit. Here's a picture of the pit about when I left in 2018. And the important piece here is, well, a number of things, but this pit is about 400 feet deep right here. The water in the bottom of the pit I was in charge of pumping amongst a few other things. And right where my cursor is, there's a big pump that runs a pipe up over the edge to another pump. And then anyway, so one Monday morning I came to work and they had hit a pocket of pyrrhotite. And pyrrhotite, I believe, is about 7 times more reactive than iron pyrite to oxygen. And so it forms acid mine drainage at a very high rate. So this water that you see that looks kind of muddy and crappy in the bottom was blood red. It was really a phenomenon that I was not expecting to see. The polymet deposit they're planning to mine has lots of pyrrhotite in it, or a higher amount than other copper nickel deposits. As you can see, the object here was to get down to a certain point and then start a decline into an underground reserves. What I want to talk about here is how this mine permitting was done so quickly, I guess, is when we approached the Corps of Engineers in Charleston, they said, we don't have the people or the expertise to evaluate your mining operation. We just can't handle it. So Haile or Remarco hired a third-party engineering company at a big expense. It was about, I think, somewhere around $30 million. It was a lot of money. And so they worked for the Corps of Engineers, and they were very particular about analyzing any of the proposals that we made and developing alternatives. It was a big hassle, but I can tell you that the details that we came up with in our permit are much greater than what I've seen in all the mine plans that have been presented to Minnesota. So that was a big factor, I believe, in helping the Corps deal with something that was out of their league. Remarco also purchased 3 sensitive ecologically threatened areas in South Carolina and donated them to the state as a reserve and made them into state parks. So that went a long ways to building a legacy of permanence that we really were interested in trying to make something better if we couldn't do it right there, at least in the rest of the state. The Haile Gold Mine, since it had been an inactive area, and there were 2 other mines nearby that had become Superfund sites. And I believe that the EPA was very interested in making sure that somebody was taking care of Haile itself and not letting it become a Superfund site. So I think that helped too. Like I said, our collective decision was to make Haile a world-class example of environmental responsibility. And we made the decision to use double liners with under drain leak detection that I believe went well far beyond what the rest of the background of the countryside was all affected by sulfides. There's saprolite that's been weathered. Like I said, this was part of the Mid-Atlantic Rift. So there's kind of a background of low pH minerals almost everywhere. But the idea was that we were going to do something to contain any of the work that we did. Also, we were going to backfill the mine to original topography. When there was any citizen or group comments about what we were doing, we invited them to come in. Also, one thing that that came up during the the review of our permitting was that we were still drilling, and the point was, well, if you're still drilling, why are you only permitting for one small aspect of your operation? And the next morning, all the drillers showed up in my office and had to give them jobs. So the drilling was completely shut. The exploration drilling was completely shut down for almost 2 years, well, 18 months, I think. Here's a picture of the sumps that at Talon has just dumped their drill mud in. Obviously, there's no liners here. On the right, you can see the 500-acre tailings impoundment. I think, if I recall, I'll get this wrong if I say it was $90 million, but it was very expensive. And here's what a double liner system looks like. Here's the tailings, and there's a primary liner and a secondary liner, and coarse rock in between with a pump that extracts anything that leaks. I'll keep going here. Here's a picture of it. It's a downstream construction, so all the embankment is built up from the sides. You can see them spraying some water here. They were having dust problems. This, I think, is 2021, and they had requested to advance the first embankment, and the second one was, I think you can see it over here, is already done, and they had to advance the third raise. You can kind of see there's not much freeboard around the edge, and the problem with the change in climate is that the atmospheric rivers would literally just gush and dump an inch of rain, maybe 3 inches an hour. It was really phenomenal, and I believe that they've lost a lot of their freeboard, and so they've had to accelerate some of their construction to get more capacity. But this is what a tailings pond looks like in a world-class mine, and it's constructed with downstream construction. Here's what after Polymet didn't get their mining permit, it was they did some testing to see if they could put bentonite on the bottom of their tailings pond to seal it. And this little sprinkling of bentonite was going to protect St. Louis River. And well, it's not anything that I've ever seen in my experience of building tailings dams or anything else I've ever seen in industry. Some of the unexpected things that they Haile has run amok. They ran into some mercury in their ore. They didn't report it and didn't deal with it, so they got fined $100,000 by the South Carolina DHEC. They also failed to meet limits on cyanide and cadmium and thallium. So even with all these other world-class constraints, the new mining company, Oceanic Gold, that bought Remarco, has run into some difficulties. And I'll just say there's lots of big chunks, and they're breaking them up here. Oceanic Gold has also run amok in their international projects. They've got one in New Zealand, in the Philippines, and they've had some issues. Rio Tinto's got the same issue. They've got a rap sheet of, well, environmental problems. I wanted to show you, this is the latest of, at least that I've seen, of an aerial flyover. but you can see the size. This is a 5,000 acre project, and there's the mine processing plant, and you can see the plant, and there's the pits. There's actually a prison right next door to it, and these are also aligned dumps for high sulfuric acid rock. This one is right here too, and there's a bit there. You can see that water. Water that's that color has aluminum in it. There's all kinds of other minerals. There's the tailings pond. You can see the size of that. What struck me about this was how big it was, but in relationship to the Iron Range in Minnesota, this is really just a postage stamp compared to the 110 miles long of the Iron Range. But this is what you can expect from a sulfide mine. At least this is what it looks like. And remember, this is probably a showcase of mining in the world. And boy, I hope they figure it out. But the recent increases in the price of gold is almost going to guarantee that they're going to make this project even bigger. So the critical lessons are that there needs to be an over design of sulfide containment. And like I said, they've increased their tailings capacity. The ownership changes from a junior developer to the operator does affect the handoff of environmental care and promises made by individuals. It just did. And I think that's the source of their problems with paying fines for environmental compliance. Remote foreign headquarters add challenges, but this is not new to the industry, like SR, Glencore, Greenbridge Tech, or Rio Tinto, or Greg Luxick. It's like the difference between renting something and owning it. Incremental project expansion driven by the market, but it just works out that way as initial small projects keep expanding as more exploratory drilling discovers more ore. So that back to the nose of the camel. You're looking at the nose of the camel in South Carolina.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions, Chris, one of which is the Haile Gold Mine located in a baseline water-rich environment with adjacent wetlands, lakes, rivers, or streams?
Oh my, yes, it really is. And plus, they get about 48 inches a year. The other aspect is that they have these atmospheric rivers, and it just deluges like crazy. So yes, it is a water rich. It's a damaged environment, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's not a pristine green area like Tamarack at all. It's been mined since, like I said, since the 1800s. So it does have a lot of environmental damage. And I would say that this might be equated to be similar to the effects of 50 years of taconite mining.
Well, that's a good segue to this next question. What level of sulfates in the water have been detected downstream from the various taconite mines that you mentioned on the Mesabi Iron Range?
Well, there's two ways to measure that. There's a micro and a macro way of measuring that. The macro is measuring the Secchi disk reading for how much algae blooms there are. And the macro effect is also how much mercury is in the fish. So water sampling doesn't really reflect the long-term bioaccumulation. And I think that's the important factor. So the readings that have been taken that are just outside of the seepage areas around the tailings ponds range anywhere from 1,000 milligrams per liter to at Mintac to like 300 or 400 at EVTAC or United. Looks like we have another question from the chat. I'd like to answer this. Please describe the mining economics that would limit the ability of Talon Metals from shipping by rail the sulfate ore to be processed in North Dakota, and thus requiring smelting in Minnesota with related pollution production. This is a question of economics, and we're back at can this whole project be done to make a profit? And so about economics of rail haulage is related to the cutoff grade of the ore. And this is always the case of how rich is the deposit? Is it high grade enough to pay for lots of other things too, like water treatment facilities or a local smelter? That's always the case. It's the same with all the rest of the other copper nickel projects in Minnesota that are being looked at now. What is the economics? It's the same as New Range, which is now Polymet, or it used to be Polymet, hauling their ore to where they're claiming is in Sudbury, their concentrate to Sudbury to be processed. Practical economics say that maybe you could do it under a pilot study or something for short term, but long term economics are going to prove out something a lot different. And that's the case for the regional economic or the regional study again, is that this is a larger picture. And so what is the economics of this? It is being shifted somewhat by grant money to try to kick off this this green revolution, and so it's an artificial environment that isn't long term. It just is not a long term sustained situation. It's similar to what taconite's gone through. It's a low grade iron, and it has to be a low grade iron ore that has to be competitive with other iron ore deposits throughout the rest of the world. So it's the same case here. I think that's it. Thank you for letting me respond and give my explanation for what I believe sulfide containment and world-class containment really should look like. And I think Haile has a start on what we should be talking about as far as liners and water treatment. And thanks again.
Bob, what do you got for us?
It's quite a coincidence that Chris mentioned the Dunker site and Bob Bay and Birch Lake. My brother came up for a visit yesterday, and I took him out there as close as you can legally get to the Dunker pit. I took my conductivity meter and checked out conductivity for Bob Bay hits Birch Lake, so you got a lot of dilution there. The reading was 90 microsiemens. That's about probably in the ballpark of twice what it is when it comes out of the boundary waters into Birch Lake. Then I went where Unnamed Creek comes off of that Dunker site. That's off of the old waste dump that's causing all the problems. And that was 1,200 microsiemens. And it's not a big discharge this time of year, but there is an active current coming off of that site. And what should be a lesson for us, they quit mining that pit 30 years ago. And they were already treating the water before they quit mining. And so the state of Minnesota, the taxpayers, we've been working on that cleanup for 30 years. We still don't have the job done. So if we're skeptical about more mines in Minnesota, we have every right to be. And you know that Dunker site is a beautiful spot. If you got a car with high clearance, the average, you can drive back in there. It's a little bit of a rough road coming off of the Tomahawk Road. But I've seen people camping back there, and I tell those people the fish in that Bob Bay, years ago they did tests. They have high minerals in their fish flesh. the mercury, the copper, the nickel. So anyhow, I just was pleased to see him put that map up there of the Dunker site, and that we have an example of Minnesota that our state agencies are not doing the job. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And yeah, it sounds to me like the Talon mine is a preventable disaster that should not move forward. I think we're going to end the recording there. So thank you, Chris.